My name is Mike, and I've been a long-haul truck driver for over 15 years. In that time, I've seen and heard things that would make most people's skin crawl. But nothing prepared me for the harrowing experience I had one fateful night in the summer of 2018. I still struggle to make sense of it all, and I often wonder if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or something far more sinister. It was a hot July evening when I picked up a load in Memphis, Tennessee, heading toward a small town in Alabama. The sun was setting, casting an orange hue across the highway, and I felt a familiar sense of excitement as I embarked on the journey. It was a straightforward route, one I'd taken many times before. I settled into the rhythm of the open road, the engine humming beneath me like a lullaby. As night fell, I found myself driving through the back roads of Alabama, surrounded by dense woods and the occasional flicker of fireflies. The darkness seemed to stretch on forever, and I was the only vehicle on the road. I switched on the radio, searching for something to break the silence, but the static was all I could find. Just as I was about to give up and focus on the road, I picked up a faint signal. "Good evening, folks. You're listening to WCZA Radio, your source for country classics and local news." The DJ's cheerful voice crackled through the speakers. I chuckled to myself, grateful for the distraction. As I drove, the music lulled me into a peaceful state. But that serenity was shattered when I noticed something unusual out of the corner of my eye. A figure stood by the roadside, waving frantically. I slowed down, my heart pounding as I pulled over. It was a woman, drenched in sweat and dirt, her clothes torn and disheveled. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with disheveled hair and a wild look in her eyes. "Please, can you help me?" she begged, her voice shaky. "My car broke down, and I need to get to the nearest town." I hesitated, the familiar warnings from my mother echoing in my mind. "Never pick up hitchhikers," she used to say, but there was something desperate about her. "Sure, hop in," I said, opening the passenger door. She climbed in, and I could smell the sweat and fear radiating from her. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice trembling. "I was so scared. I thought I'd be out here all night." I glanced over at her. "What happened? Where are you headed?" "I was driving to a friend's house in Birmingham when my car overheated. I tried to walk to the nearest town, but I got lost in the woods." She took a deep breath, her eyes wide. "I swear I heard something following me." I nodded, trying to keep the conversation light. "Yeah, these woods can be creepy at night, but you're safe now. We'll be in town in no time." As I drove, the woman, whose name I learned was Sarah, started to relax. We talked about the usual small talk, where she was from, what she did for a living, and how she ended up in Alabama. But as the conversation progressed, I sensed something off about her. Her eyes darted around the cab, as if she were still searching for something lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, Sarah stiffened. "Can you turn the radio up? I love this song," she said, her voice suddenly too high-pitched. I complied, raising the volume as a classic country tune filled the cab. She began to hum along, but there was a wildness in her expression that unsettled me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I glanced at her again, and that's when I noticed the scratches on her arms, the dirt caked under her fingernails. "Were you out there long?" I asked, trying to mask my growing concern. "Long enough," she replied, her eyes flashing. "Long enough to know that sometimes the woods can hide things that shouldn't be there." I chuckled nervously, unsure of how to respond. "You must have seen some wild animals, huh?" "Not just animals," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I saw something else, something watching me." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she said, her voice shaky. but it felt like something was tracking me, like it wanted to play a game. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. You were just scared. It's easy to feel that way out in the woods at night. She shook her head vehemently. No, Mike, I felt it. It was there, lurking just out of sight. I could hear it, even when I couldn't see it. We drove in silence for a few moments, the only sound being the crunch of gravel under the tires and the distant hoot of an owl. I tried to focus on the road, but my mind kept drifting back to Sarah's words. The woods were ancient, teeming with secrets, and I felt a wave of unease wash over me. After a while, we approached a small gas station on the outskirts of a town. It was late, and the place was dimly lit, with flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the pavement. You want me to drop you off here? I asked, suddenly anxious to put some distance between us. She shook her head. No, let's keep going. Just a little further, please. I nodded hesitantly, my instincts telling me to turn back. But I pressed on, the darkness closing in around us as we drove deeper into the night. The radio continued to crackle, but the songs had started to sound distorted, like something was interfering with the signal. As we drove, I felt a growing sense of dread. The air in the cab grew thick with tension, and I could feel Sarah's eyes on me, watching me. I tried to shake it off, but my heart raced with every mile we traveled. Suddenly, the truck hit a bump, and I felt a jolt. The dashboard lights flickered momentarily, and I glanced down. What was that? I muttered, glancing in the rearview mirror. But the road behind us was empty, just dark trees lining the highway. It's probably just the suspension, Sarah said, her voice oddly calm. But keep your eyes on the road. Yeah, sure, I replied, trying to dismiss the creeping fear that was rising in my chest. The road twisted and turned, surrounded by dense woods on either side. It felt like we were entering another world, one where the shadows loomed larger and the darkness felt alive. I glanced at Sarah, who was now staring out the window, her expression distant. I could sense that she was lost in her thoughts, and for a moment, I let my guard down. That's when I saw it, a flash of movement in the woods. My heart stopped, and I slammed on the brakes. Did you see that? I asked, my voice rising in panic. Sarah's head snapped around. What? There was something back there, I insisted, my pulse racing. It moved. Her expression shifted, and I could see a flicker of fear in her eyes. Maybe it's just a deer, she said, her voice trembling. I shook my head. No, it was too big for a deer. I hesitated, the fear crawling up my spine. I glanced around, feeling the weight of the darkness closing in on us. We should turn back. I don't feel good about this. Don't turn back, Sarah shouted, her voice suddenly fierce. We have to keep going. Panic surged through me as I realized I didn't know what was happening. Why? Why do you want to keep going? Because it's not safe to turn around, she said, her voice low and urgent. Trust me, Mike. Just drive. I swallowed hard, torn between instinct and her intense gaze. I pressed down on the accelerator, hoping to put distance between us and whatever was lurking in the woods. But as we drove, I felt a sense of dread intensifying, like we were being pulled into something sinister. The trees seemed to close in around us, the road narrowing as we ventured deeper into the night. Suddenly, the radio cut out completely, plunging us into a suffocating silence. I glanced at Sarah, her face pale and tense. What's happening? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head, her eyes darting around. I don't know. I just know we have to keep going. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. The darkness felt alive, a force pressing against us from all sides. The weight of the silence was oppressive, and I could feel my heart racing as fear took hold. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement again. I turned to look, and my breath caught in my throat. There it was, a dark shape, low to the ground, slipping through the trees. It was quick, moving like a shadow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching us. "What was that?" I shouted, panic creeping into my voice. Sarah's face went pale, and she leaned closer to the window. "I don't know. Just keep driving." I pressed the gas pedal down harder, but the truck felt like it was moving through molasses. The engine roared, but the shadows seemed to engulf us, pulling us deeper into their embrace. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back as the darkness closed in. Suddenly, there was a loud thump, followed by a crash. I swerved, narrowly avoiding a fallen tree that had appeared out of nowhere. My heart raced as I regained control of the truck, but my mind was racing with terror. "What the hell was that?" I gasped, my hands trembling. "I don't know," Sarah shouted, panic rising in her voice. "Just drive, please." I slammed on the gas, my heart pounding in my chest. The trees blurred past, the shadows creeping closer as I tried to escape whatever was chasing us. But as I drove, the feeling of dread only grew. It was as if the darkness was alive, pressing against us from all sides. Then, out of nowhere, the headlights caught a glimpse of something in the road. I slammed on the brakes, and the truck skidded to a stop. I stared into the darkness, my breath coming in quick gasps. There, illuminated by the headlights, was a figure, a man, standing motionless in the middle of the road. His clothes were tattered, and his face was obscured by shadows. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. "Get away from him!" Sarah screamed, her voice filled with terror. "Don't let him near you." I turned to her, confusion flooding my mind. "What are you talking about? Who is he?" "Just go," she shouted, her panic palpable. I threw the truck into reverse, backing up quickly. The figure remained still, watching us with a cold, calculating gaze. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but I felt frozen in place. "What does he want?" I yelled, my voice cracking. "I don't know," Sarah cried, her eyes wide with fear. "Just go." With trembling hands, I shifted into drive and slammed the gas pedal again. The truck lurched forward, and I swerved around the figure, my heart racing as I glanced back. The man didn't move. He simply stood there, watching us with a haunting expression. As we sped away, I could feel Sarah's eyes boring into the back of my head. "What the hell was that?" I gasped, still trying to process the encounter. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," she said, her voice trembling. "Drive faster." I pressed down on the accelerator, and the truck roared down the dark road. But no matter how fast I drove, the sense of dread remained, a weight pressing down on my chest. The road twisted and turned, but no matter where we went, I felt as if we were trapped in some kind of nightmare. Every time I glanced at the trees, I half expected to see that man following us, lurking just out of sight. After what felt like an eternity, I finally spotted lights in the distance. "Look, a gas station," I shouted, hope flooding my voice. "Don't stop," Sarah screamed, panic rising in her voice. "We can't stop." I hesitated, torn between my instinct to seek safety and her frantic warning. But the fear in her eyes convinced me. I pressed down on the gas pedal, determined to outrun whatever was haunting us. The gas station came into view, a small oasis of light in the encroaching darkness. I could see the flickering neon sign and the glow of fluorescent lights. Relief washed over me as we approached, but the tension in the air remained thick. As I pulled into the parking lot, I could see a few vehicles parked outside, an old pickup truck and a couple of cars. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. "We made it," I said, glancing at Sarah. But her expression had changed. She looked terrified, her eyes darting around the parking lot. No, we can't stay here," she said, her voice shaking. "They're waiting for us." "Who?" I asked, confusion washing over me. "The people in the woods," she said, her voice trembling. "They want to take us." I shook my head, trying to process her words. "You're not making any sense." "I'm serious," she shouted, grabbing my arm. "We need to leave, now." Suddenly, the gas station's door swung open, and a man stepped outside, his expression dark and serious. He looked like he had been working there for a long time, with a weathered face and a worn-out cap. "Hey, are you guys okay?" he asked, looking concerned. I glanced at Sarah, who was trembling in her seat. "We're fine. Just need to get some gas." The man's eyes narrowed as he glanced back at the road behind us. "You shouldn't be driving out here at night," he said, his tone grave. "There are things out there that don't take kindly to strangers." My heart dropped as I realized that he knew. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at Sarah, his gaze filled with understanding. "You should have turned around when you had the chance," he said softly. "They're not going to let you go so easily." Panic surged through me. "Who? What are you talking about?" But before he could answer, Sarah let out a scream. I turned just in time to see a figure emerge from the trees, a dark silhouette creeping closer. The gas station attendant stepped back, his expression filled with dread. "Get inside," he shouted, his voice urgent. I fumbled with the door, but my hands were shaking. Sarah was already out, sprinting toward the entrance. I followed her, adrenaline pumping through my veins as we rushed inside. The attendant slammed the door shut behind us, locking it tight. The gas station was dimly lit, filled with the smell of gasoline and stale coffee. I glanced around, my heart racing as I saw a few other customers inside, their faces pale with fear. "What the hell is going on?" I gasped, looking at the attendant. "Just wait," he said, his voice low. "They can't come in here, not while the door is locked." I turned to Sarah, who was trembling beside me. "What did you see out there?" I asked, my voice trembling. "There were people," she whispered, her eyes wide. "They were watching us. They're not human." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. The attendant stepped closer, his expression grim. "You saw them too, didn't you?" I nodded, my throat dry. "What are they?" "They're lost souls," he said quietly. "People who ventured too far into the woods. Now they're trapped, and they want to drag others down with them." I glanced outside, but the darkness swallowed everything. "How do we get out of here?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We wait until dawn," the attendant said. "They can't cross into the light." As the minutes dragged on, I felt the tension building in the air. The other customers were whispering among themselves, their eyes darting nervously toward the door. I could hear the distant sounds of rustling outside, like whispers carried on the wind. "What if they find a way in?" Sarah asked, her voice quivering. "They won't," the attendant assured her. "Not as long as we stay inside." But as the night wore on, I could feel the oppressive darkness closing in around us. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see those figures lurking just out of sight. The shadows danced in the dim light, and I could feel a sense of dread creeping back in. Time felt distorted as we waited, the minutes stretching into hours. Finally, just as dawn began to break, the first light filtered through the windows. A sense of relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the store, followed by a chilling laugh. I turned, my heart racing as I saw a figure standing in the doorway, one of the dark shapes that had haunted us the entire night. "Let us in!" it shrieked, its voice filled with a twisted kind of glee. I felt the air grow cold as the figure stepped closer, and panic surged through me. The attendant rushed to the front, his expression fierce. "Stay back," he shouted, brandishing a heavy wrench. But the figure only laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You think you can keep us out? We're everywhere." In that moment, chaos erupted. The other customers screamed, and I felt Sarah grab my arm. "What do we do?" she cried, her eyes wide with terror. "We run," I shouted, pushing past the attendant as he struggled to keep the figure at bay. We dashed toward the exit, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The door swung open, and I could see the first rays of sunlight breaking over the horizon. We rushed outside, the air filled with the sound of chaos behind us. As we sprinted toward my truck, I glanced back at the gas station. The figure had stepped inside, and I could hear the attendant's voice rising in desperation. "Get out! Get out now!" I climbed into the cab, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. Sarah was right behind me, her face pale with fear. I started the engine, the roar of the truck drowning out the chaos behind us. "Go!" Sarah screamed, her voice frantic. I slammed the gas pedal down, and we tore out of the parking lot, the gravel flying behind us. I didn't look back, my heart racing as we sped down the road, leaving the nightmare behind. As we drove, the sun rose higher, illuminating the landscape around us. I could see the trees receding in the rearview mirror, but I could still feel the lingering sense of dread. What had we just escaped? "Are you okay?" I asked Sarah, glancing over at her. She nodded, but I could see the fear still etched on her face. What were they? What did we just experience? I shook my head, still trying to process it all. "I don't know. I just wanted to get you to safety." But deep down, I knew that whatever we encountered in those woods was far from over. It lingered like a dark shadow, waiting for the next opportunity to pounce. The experience haunted my dreams, leaving me with a chilling sense of unease. From that day forward, I made a promise to myself. I would never drive those back roads alone at night again. The woods may hold their secrets, but I had seen enough to know that some darkness is better left undisturbed. As for Sarah, we went our separate ways after that night. I sometimes think of her and wonder if she made it to her friend's house safely. I hope she did. I hope we both did. But I'll never forget the feeling of being hunted, the feeling that something dark and twisted lurked just out of sight, waiting for its next victim. I always thought of myself as a seasoned truck driver, someone who had seen it all on the highways of America. But nothing prepared me for the night I found myself driving along Highway 78, a road that twisted and turned through the dense woods of Alabama. It was a chilly autumn evening in 2016, and the leaves crunched beneath my tires as I made my way towards Montgomery. I had just finished a long haul from Nashville, delivering a load of furniture to a small shop. I was looking forward to some downtime, a hot meal, and a good night's sleep. Instead, I found myself caught in a series of events that would forever haunt my memories. It was around midnight when I decided to pull over at a rest area. The place was eerily quiet, save for the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. I parked my rig under a flickering light, hoping it would keep the darkness at bay. After grabbing a quick snack and a cup of coffee, I decided to stretch my legs and call my wife, Jennifer, to let her know I was safe. "Hey babe, I said, trying to keep my voice upbeat. I'm on my way home. Just stopped for a quick break. Be careful, okay? She replied, concern creeping into her voice. I heard there have been some weird things happening on the roads lately. Yeah, I heard the same, I said, brushing it off. Just some urban legends, nothing to worry about. After a brief conversation, I hung up and climbed back into the cab. As I settled into my seat, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. It was just a rest area, but something felt off. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just the fatigue creeping in. I hit the road again, the engine humming softly as I drove deeper into the night. The darkened woods surrounded me, casting long shadows across the pavement. I turned up the radio to drown out the silence, but even the music couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. About an hour later, I spotted something strange on the side of the road. It was a woman, standing alone in a white dress, her hair flowing like a ghostly veil in the wind. I slowed down, unsure of what to make of her. My instinct was to keep driving, but something compelled me to stop. I rolled down the window, trying to make out her features. Hey, are you okay? I called out. The woman turned slowly, her face obscured by shadows. Help me, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the engine's hum. I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something wrong about her, something unsettling, but as a truck driver, I was used to helping those in need. I parked the rig and stepped out, leaving the truck idling. Where are you headed? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Please, I need a ride, she said, her voice trembling. I lost my way. I hesitated, glancing back at my truck. The woods loomed behind her, dark and foreboding. Are you sure you're okay? It's not safe out here. I'm fine, she insisted, taking a step closer. Just help me. I was torn. Part of me wanted to get back into the truck and drive away, but the other part, the one that had always wanted to help others, couldn't abandon her. I reluctantly nodded and gestured for her to get in. All right, but you need to tell me where we're going. She climbed into the passenger seat, and I noticed her hands were cold and trembling. As I pulled back onto the highway, I tried to make small talk. So, where are you headed? She didn't respond immediately, staring out the window as if lost in thought. I just need to get home, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. I frowned, glancing at her. Where's home? Far from here, she replied, her gaze still fixed on the trees blurring past. As we drove deeper into the night, I began to feel an unsettling tension building in the cab. It was as if the air had thickened and the shadows pressed closer. I could see the outlines of the trees flickering by, and for a moment, I felt as if they were watching us. Are you hungry? I asked, trying to break the silence. I've got some snacks in the back. She turned her head towards me, her eyes wide and glassy. No, thank you. I just want to go home. Her response sent a shiver down my spine, and I glanced at her again, noticing how pale she looked. It was as if the light in the cab couldn't reach her. I tried to shake off the feeling and focused on the road ahead. Suddenly, the radio crackled and went silent. I glanced at the dashboard, confused. That's strange, I muttered, fiddling with the knobs. Just as I was about to pull over to check the wiring, the woman spoke again. You shouldn't be driving at this hour, she said softly. Why's that? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. There are things out here, she said, her voice low and serious. Things that don't want you to leave. I laughed nervously, but her expression didn't change. Come on, it's just a dark road. You're starting to sound like one of those urban legends. She turned to me, her eyes now piercing and intense. This is not a joke. You need to listen. I felt my heart race, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. What do you mean? But before she could answer, I spotted something in the rearview mirror. A dark figure on the side of the road, watching us. I squinted, trying to make it out, but as I turned my head, it vanished. What was that? I asked, panic creeping into my voice. The woman was staring straight ahead, her face pale. Keep driving, she urged, her tone now urgent. Why? What's going on? I felt a surge of panic rise within me. Just don't stop, she said, her voice trembling. Whatever you do, don't stop. My heart raced as I pressed down on the accelerator, trying to outrun whatever was lurking behind us. The trees blurred by, and the darkness seemed to close in around us. I could feel the fear radiating from her, and it only heightened my anxiety. As we sped along the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, but there was nothing there. Just darkness. What's out there? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lost souls, she replied, her voice low and haunting. People who never made it home. They wander these woods, searching for someone to take their place. I felt a cold chill grip me, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. You can't be serious, I said, trying to laugh it off, but it came out shaky. They'll try to take you, she said, her eyes wide with fear. They'll use me to lure you in. Lure me in? What do you mean? I asked, my heart racing. Just keep driving, she repeated, her voice trembling. Whatever you do, don't look back. The tension in the cab was suffocating as I pressed on the gas pedal, determined to put as much distance between us and whatever was out there. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead, but every time I glanced at the trees, I felt a sense of dread settle in my stomach. Then, out of nowhere, the radio crackled back to life, and I could hear static. The sound was disorienting, and I reached for the knob to turn it off, but the static morphed into distorted voices, whispering my name. Did you hear that? I asked, my voice rising in panic. The woman turned to me, her eyes wide with fear. Don't listen, just keep driving. I nodded, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The voices grew louder, filling the cab with an oppressive weight. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel the malevolence behind them. Get away from her, I shouted, desperation creeping into my voice. Suddenly, the voices ceased, and an eerie silence enveloped us. I glanced at the woman, her expression now a mix of fear and sorrow. They're angry, she said, her voice trembling. They don't like it when someone tries to leave. Leave? I echoed, my heart racing. You mean you're not? But before I could finish, I felt a sharp jolt, and the truck swerved off the road, coming to a halt on the shoulder. What the hell was that? I shouted, my heart racing. I don't know, she cried, her voice rising in panic. We have to go, now. I fumbled with the gear shift, trying to regain control. I can't just leave it here. Forget the truck. We need to get out of here, she screamed. I turned to her, confusion flooding my mind. What do you mean? Where will we go? Into the woods, she urged, her eyes filled with fear. They can't follow us if we go into the woods. Before I could process her words, she was out of the cab, sprinting toward the dark tree line. I hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the road, but the oppressive feeling of dread was too strong. I jumped out of the truck, following her into the darkness. The forest swallowed us whole, branches snapping beneath our feet as we ran deeper into the shadows. I could hear the rustling behind us, the whispers growing louder as we pushed forward. It felt as though the very trees were alive, reaching out to ensnare us. Keep going, she urged, glancing back nervously. They're coming. I stumbled, trying to keep up with her, but the darkness was disorienting. I felt the weight of something behind us, chasing us through the underbrush. What do we do? I shouted, panic rising in my chest. Just keep running, she cried, her voice filled with desperation. Suddenly, I tripped over a root and fell hard to the ground, the air knocked out of me. The woman stopped, turning back to help me, but as she reached for me, a shadow loomed behind her. Run! I shouted, scrambling to my feet. She turned, and the shadow lunged, but she was too quick. We sprinted deeper into the woods, the sounds of the night closing in around us. I could hear the whispers now, echoing through the trees, filling my head with dread. What do they want? I gasped, trying to catch my breath. They want you, she shouted back, fear etched on her face. You're the one they want. Before I could respond, we stumbled upon a clearing, moonlight spilling down like a spotlight. It was eerily beautiful, but there was something unsettling about it. The trees stood tall, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers, reaching for the sky. What is this place? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, she replied, her eyes darting around nervously. But we can't stay here. Just then, the whispers grew louder, echoing through the clearing. I could feel the weight of their gaze upon us, and panic surged through me. What do we do? I shouted, my heart racing. We have to find a way to escape, she said, her voice trembling. If we stay here, they'll take us. In that moment, I felt a surge of determination. We can't let them win, I shouted, gripping her hand. We have to fight back. But as I spoke those words, the shadows shifted, and the whispers grew deafening. I could see figures emerging from the darkness, their forms twisted and grotesque. They surrounded us, closing in like a pack of wolves. Run, I yelled, pulling her along as we sprinted through the clearing. We darted back into the trees, the figures trailing behind us. The branches snagged at our clothes, but we pushed through, adrenaline driving us forward. I could hear their laughter, mocking and sinister, echoing through the night. We ran until our lungs burned, our legs aching, but still, we pressed on. I didn't know where we were going, only that we had to keep moving. As we navigated through the dense underbrush, I stumbled upon an old cabin, half hidden by the trees. In here, I shouted, pulling her toward it. We burst through the door, slamming it shut behind us. The cabin was dark and musty, filled with the scent of decay. There was a flickering candle on a table, casting eerie shadows on the walls. What is this place? The woman gasped, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know, I said, scanning the room, but it's better than being out there. We leaned against the door, listening as the whispers grew louder outside. I could hear them clawing at the walls, their voices rising in a cacophony of anger and despair. Do you think they'll find us? She asked, trembling beside me. I don't know, I admitted, feeling a chill creep over me. But we have to stay quiet. We crouched in the shadows, hearts pounding as the whispers grew louder, filling the cabin with a sense of dread. I could feel the weight of their presence, pressing against the walls, threatening to break through. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the door, causing us both to jump. Let us in, a voice cried out, distorted and haunting. We just want to help you. I shook my head, panic rising in my chest. Don't open the door, it's a trick. The banging grew louder, the whispers rising to a frenzied pitch. Let us in, they cried. You can't escape. I gripped the door tighter, fear coursing through me. What do they want? I shouted. They want to take us. the woman screamed, her eyes wide with terror. "We can't let them." The door shuddered under the weight of their presence, and I could feel the walls vibrating. I glanced around the cabin, searching for something, anything, that could help us. "Over there." I pointed to a rusty axe hanging on the wall. "Grab it." She sprinted over, her hands shaking as she took hold of the axe. "What do we do?" she cried, her voice trembling. "Hold it ready," I said, bracing myself against the door. "If they get in, we fight back." The door buckled again, and I could hear their voices rising, calling out to us in a twisted chorus. "Join us! You'll never leave!" I could feel the darkness seeping into the cabin, wrapping around us like a shroud. I glanced at the woman, her face pale and terrified. "We won't give in," I shouted, determination flooding my veins. Suddenly, the door burst open, and shadows spilled into the room, writhing and twisting like smoke. The woman raised the axe, her hands shaking, but she stood her ground. "Get back!" I shouted, pushing her behind me. The shadows lunged, reaching for us with skeletal fingers, but we fought back. The woman swung the axe, catching one of the shadows off guard, and it shrieked, dissipating into the air. "Keep going," I urged, adrenaline surging through me. We fought as they closed in, our hearts pounding in our chests. Each swing of the axe sent the shadows reeling, but they kept coming, a relentless tide of darkness. "Don't stop!" I yelled, determination fueling my every move. We battled against the encroaching darkness, fueled by our fear and desperation. With every swing of the axe, we fought for our lives, refusing to let them take us. Finally, with a final desperate swing, the woman struck at the shadows, and they screamed in agony, dissipating into nothingness. The cabin fell silent, and we stood panting, the weight of the darkness lifting. I glanced at the woman, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Did we do it?" she whispered. "I think so," I replied, still catching my breath. "But we can't let our guard down. We need to get out of here." We stepped cautiously toward the door, peering out into the darkness. The woods were eerily quiet now, the oppressive weight lifted. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but I knew we couldn't linger. "Let's get back to the truck," I said, glancing around. "We need to leave this place." We stepped outside, the cool night air refreshing against our skin. The shadows were gone, but the woods still felt alive, as if they were watching us. We hurried back toward the road, the fear still lingering in my chest. As we approached the truck, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I climbed into the cab, and the woman followed, her eyes still wide with fear. "Let's get out of here," I said, turning the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I pulled back onto the highway, the headlights cutting through the darkness. As we drove, I glanced at her. "Are you okay?" She nodded, but I could see the fear still etched on her face. "What was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I admitted, trying to shake off the memories. "But we made it out." The road stretched ahead, illuminated by the headlights. I felt a sense of calm wash over me, but the memories of that night would stay with me forever. Eventually, we reached a gas station, the neon lights flickering in the darkness. I pulled in, relieved to see other people around. We climbed out of the truck, the cool air washing over us like a balm. "I need to call for help," I said, pulling out my phone. But as I did, I glanced back at the truck, and my heart dropped. The shadows were back, swirling around the rig, whispering in the darkness. I felt a chill creep up my spine, and I turned to the woman. "We have to go," I said urgently. "But we can't leave," she protested, her eyes wide with fear. "There's nothing we can do," I said, my voice rising. We have to get away from here." We ran toward the gas station, the whispers growing louder behind us. As we reached the door, I glanced back one last time, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The shadows had taken form, twisted figures reaching out toward us, their faces contorted in agony. I slammed the door behind us, the sound echoing in the stillness. "What are they?" she gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "I don't know," I said, trying to catch my breath. "But we have to stay away from them." We huddled in the corner of the gas station, fear coursing through us as we watched the shadows swirl outside. The whispers grew louder, and I could feel their anger radiating from the glass. "We can't let them take us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We won't," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We just have to wait for help." Minutes felt like hours as we waited, the shadows pressing against the glass. I could see their faces twisted in agony, whispering our names, pleading with us to join them. Finally, the lights of a police car illuminated the parking lot, and I felt a surge of hope. I rushed to the door, flinging it open as the officers approached. "Are you okay?" one of them asked, concern etched on his face. "No," I shouted, glancing back at the shadows. "They're out there." The officers exchanged glances, and one of them pulled out his flashlight, shining it toward the dark figures. "What do you mean?" "They're not human," I cried, panic rising in my chest. "They're trying to take us." The officers looked skeptical, but I could see the unease in their eyes as the shadows pressed closer. "Stay back," one of them shouted, aiming the flashlight at the figures. The shadows recoiled, their whispers turning to screams of rage. I felt a wave of panic wash over me as I realized they were more powerful than I had ever imagined. "Get inside," the officer shouted, motioning for us to move. We rushed back into the gas station, slamming the door behind us. "What the hell is going on?" one of the officers demanded, looking at us with wide eyes. I glanced at the woman beside me, and we exchanged a look of fear. "We need to figure out how to stop them," I said, my voice trembling. The officers looked at us in disbelief, but the shadows were growing stronger, their whispers filling the air. "We need to fight back," I urged. "We can't let them take us." But as I spoke those words, I felt the darkness closing in, suffocating and oppressive. I glanced back at the door, panic rising in my chest. Suddenly, the shadows burst through the door, their twisted forms flooding the room. The officers shouted, their faces pale with fear as they drew their weapons. "Get back!" one of them yelled, but the shadows swarmed around us, their whispers rising to a deafening pitch. I felt the cold fingers grasping at me, pulling me toward the darkness. "Fight back!" I shouted, but my voice was drowned out by the chaos. The officers fired their weapons, but the bullets passed through the shadows like mist. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, but I refused to give in. "Keep fighting," I urged, but the shadows closed in, suffocating us in their darkness. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard a voice rise above the chaos. It was the woman, her voice strong and unwavering. "You don't own us," she shouted, her eyes blazing with determination. I felt a surge of energy course through me, and I joined her, shouting against the darkness. "You can't take us. We won't let you." As our voices rose in defiance, I felt the shadows recoil, their whispers turning to cries of anguish. The room filled with light, pushing back the darkness as we fought for our lives. Slowly, the shadows began to dissolve, their forms fading away as our determination grew stronger. We fought together, refusing to let fear win. Finally, with one last cry, we expelled the darkness from the gas station, and the room fell silent. We stood panting, the weight of the shadows lifted. The officers looked at us in disbelief, their faces pale. "What just happened?" one of them asked, shaking his head. "I don't know," I said, my heart still racing. "But we made it." As dawn broke, the first light of morning filtering through the windows, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The darkness was gone, and we had survived. I turned to the woman, gratitude swelling in my chest. "Thank you for not giving up," I said, my voice trembling. She smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. "We did it together." In that moment, I realized that the bond we shared in that dark hour had saved us. And as we stepped outside into the light of a new day, I knew that the memories of that night would stay with me forever, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the light. As I climbed back into my truck, I felt a sense of hope washing over me. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face whatever came next. With the woman by my side, I felt like I could conquer anything, even the darkness that tried to take us. And as I drove away from that gas station, I knew I would never forget the haunting whispers of Highway 78. They had changed me forever, but they had also shown me the strength that lay within. With a renewed sense of purpose, I drove on, ready to face the open road and whatever challenges lay ahead. The sun rose higher in the sky, illuminating the path before me, and I knew I was no longer alone. I had been driving trucks for almost a decade, crisscrossing the vast and often desolate highways of America. Most nights were uneventful, with nothing more to distract me than the glow of my dashboard lights and the soft hum of the tires on asphalt. But then there was that one night that changed everything. It was a late fall evening in November, just after the sun had dipped below the horizon. I was on a long-haul trip from Denver to Chicago, carrying a load of electronics. The highway was mostly deserted, with only the occasional car passing by. As I drove along Interstate 70, the temperatures dropped, and a thick fog began to roll in, obscuring the view ahead. The fog was so thick that I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me. I switched on my high beams, but all they did was illuminate the swirling mist, giving it an eerie glow. After hours of driving, fatigue started to creep in. I had just passed through a small town, one of those blink-and-you-miss-it places, when I spotted a rest area just off the highway. It looked like a good spot to take a break, stretch my legs, and grab a quick bite. I pulled in, the tires crunching over gravel, as I parked near a dimly lit picnic area. The moment I stepped out of the cab, I was struck by the unsettling silence. The fog wrapped around me like a shroud, and the air felt charged, as if something were lurking just beyond the veil of mist. I shook off the feeling, attributing it to my exhaustion. I walked to the restrooms, the sound of my boots echoing off the concrete. As I stepped inside the restroom, I was greeted by the harsh fluorescent lights and the smell of stale air. I finished up quickly and made my way back outside. But as I stepped into the fog, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I quickly walked back to my truck, the sense of unease growing with each step. I climbed into the cab and locked the doors, turning on the radio to drown out the silence. I flipped through the stations, but nothing caught my interest. I settled on a talk show that was discussing urban legends and ghost stories. The host's voice provided a comforting background noise, and I leaned back, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. A little while later, I decided to grab a sandwich from the cooler. As I was unwrapping it, I noticed movement in the fog just outside my window. I squinted, trying to make out what I was seeing, but the mist obscured everything. My heart began to race as I thought I saw a figure moving closer to my truck. I turned up the radio to distract myself, but the unease lingered. Just then, My phone buzzed with a message from a fellow driver, checking in to see how I was doing. I texted back, trying to focus on something normal, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. After finishing my sandwich, I decided to take a look outside, hoping to dispel the creeping dread. I stepped out of the truck, squinting into the fog. The rest area was deserted, save for a few scattered picnic tables and trash cans. Just as I was about to head back inside, I heard a faint sound, like someone crying. I froze, my heart pounding. The sound seemed to be coming from the edge of the woods bordering the rest area. Against my better judgment, I walked toward the noise, drawn in by a mixture of concern and curiosity. As I approached the tree line, the crying grew louder. It was a haunting, pitiful sound that sent chills down my spine. I peered into the darkness, trying to see if someone needed help. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" The crying stopped abruptly, and an eerie silence settled over the area. I felt a cold breeze brush against my face, and instinctively, I took a step back. That's when I saw her, a woman standing at the edge of the trees, her white dress glowing faintly in the fog. Her hair hung down in tangled waves, and her face was obscured in shadow. I should have turned back then, but something compelled me to approach her. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer, just stared at me with wide, haunting eyes. I could feel the weight of her gaze, as if she were searching for something deep within me. "What's wrong?" I pressed, feeling an inexplicable urge to help her. As I drew closer, I noticed her expression shifted from sorrow to something more intense. Fear, maybe? She raised a trembling hand, pointing toward the dark woods behind her. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You have to run." Panic surged through me. "Who's coming?" I demanded, my heart racing. Suddenly, the air grew cold, and the shadows in the woods seemed to shift, writhing like something alive. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, fear gripping me. "They're here," she cried, her voice breaking. "You can't stay." In that moment, everything changed. The shadows erupted from the trees, grotesque forms that moved with an unnatural speed. They poured into the clearing, their whispers echoing through the fog, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of dread. I turned to run, but the woman grabbed my arm with a grip that felt almost too strong for her frail appearance. "You have to listen to me," she shouted, desperation in her eyes. "They want you. They've been waiting for you." I yanked my arm away and bolted back toward my truck, the fog swirling around me like a living thing. I could hear the whispers growing louder, a chorus of voices that clawed at my sanity. "Run, run," they echoed, a maddening chant that fueled my adrenaline. I reached my truck and fumbled with the door handle, my heart racing. Just as I swung the door open, I felt something brush against my back. I turned, and the woman was right behind me, terror etched on her face. "Please, you have to go." I scrambled into the cab and slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. The shadows danced outside, their forms shifting in the fog as they surrounded my truck. I could feel their presence pressing against the metal, trying to get in. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts. I turned the ignition, praying the engine would start, and to my relief, it roared to life. But as I shifted into drive, the headlights illuminated the area, and I caught a glimpse of the woman standing by the passenger side. She was no longer crying. Instead, her face was contorted in horror. "You have to help me," she screamed, reaching for the door. "Please don't leave me." But I couldn't. I couldn't let whatever those things were get inside the truck. I pressed the gas pedal, and the truck lurched forward, tires spinning in the gravel as I tore out of the rest area. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The shadows were closing in around her, their forms stretching and twisting as they engulfed her. She looked back at me, eyes wide with fear, and in that moment, I felt a deep sense of regret. But I couldn't stop. The road ahead was my only escape. I drove faster than I ever had before, the truck barreling down the highway, leaving the rest area and the horrors behind. The fog began to thin as I drove, but I couldn't shake the image of that woman from my mind. As I crossed into the next town, the sun began to rise, casting a golden light over the landscape. I pulled into a gas station, my heart still racing. I filled up the tank, hands shaking as I tried to process what had just happened. After paying the attendant, I climbed back into my truck and sat in silence, staring out at the road ahead. I couldn't forget the look in the woman's eyes, the terror etched on her face as the shadows took her. I thought of all the nights I had driven alone, never thinking that something like this could happen to me. The further I drove, the more the memory haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left her behind, that I had failed her in some way. I tried to convince myself it was all a hallucination, a trick of the fog and my tired mind, but deep down, I knew it was real. I continued on my journey, each mile feeling heavier than the last. I pulled into a diner for breakfast, hoping a cup of coffee and some food would clear my head. As I sat at the counter, trying to focus on the menu, I overheard a conversation between two truckers sitting nearby. "Did you hear about the disappearances?" one of them asked, lowering his voice. "A couple of drivers have gone missing around those back roads near the rest areas." My heart sank as I listened. They spoke of strange occurrences, sightings of ghostly figures, and the whispers that seemed to follow travelers late at night. My experience flooded back to me, and I felt the weight of dread settle over me once more. I tried to finish my meal, but the unease wouldn't leave me. After paying the bill, I climbed back into my truck, the weight of the road pressing down on me. I had to keep driving, had to put more distance between me and that rest area. But as the miles went by, the fog returned, creeping back into my mind. I knew that the shadows of that night would follow me, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike again. It was a haunting reminder of the darkness that existed just beyond the light, a darkness that could reach out and grab you when you least expected it. As I drove on, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the road. The radio crackled to life, a news bulletin announcing yet another driver missing. My stomach dropped. I felt the weight of the woman's fate on my shoulders, a burden that would never truly leave me. The road stretched on ahead, dark and uninviting, but I pressed on, knowing that I had to keep moving. The shadows would always be there, but I wouldn't let them consume me. I was a trucker, a survivor, and I would face whatever lay ahead, even if it meant confronting the darkness that haunted the highways of America. And as I drove into the night, I swore I could hear the whispers calling my name, a haunting melody that echoed through the fog. But I wouldn't look back. I couldn't. The road was my only refuge, and I would continue to drive, no matter the cost. I've been a long-haul trucker for over 15 years, and in that time, I've seen my fair share of strange things on the road. But nothing could have prepared me for the night I encountered something I still can't fully explain. My name is Tim Jenkins, and this is the story of how a routine run through the Appalachian Mountains nearly cost me my life, or maybe even my soul. It was late November, just after Thanksgiving, and I had a delivery scheduled to make from Boston to Charlotte, North Carolina. The route would take me down Interstate 95 for most of the way, but a section of Route 17 in Virginia was where the trouble began. That stretch of highway is known for being treacherous, especially during the colder months. Fog rolls in thick from the mountains, making visibility nearly impossible. That night was no different. The sun had long since set, and the thick fog was wrapping around the trees and road like a ghostly veil. I've always hated that stretch of road. There's something about those dark, winding mountain highways that sets you on edge, even if you don't believe in ghosts or the paranormal. It was around 11 p.m. when I reached the entrance to Route 17. My GPS showed it was the fastest way, and since I was already running late on delivery, I had no choice but to take it. The fog was so thick that I couldn't see more than 10 feet in front of me, even with my high beams on. The trees seemed to loom over the road, their skeletal branches reaching out like claws. The only sound was the hum of my engine and the occasional crack of a branch breaking in the woods. It felt like the world was dead, or maybe that I was the only living thing left in it. I turned the radio on just to break the silence, but it didn't help much. The signal kept cutting in and out, and all I could get was static. Then I saw something, someone, on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the fog, maybe an old tree stump or a shadow playing tricks on my eyes. But as I got closer, I realized it was a woman standing on the shoulder of the highway, just barely visible in the mist. She was wearing a long, dark coat, and her hair hung loose over her face. She didn't move, didn't wave me down like a stranded motorist would. She just stood there, staring, or at least I thought she was staring. I couldn't see her face clearly through the fog and the headlights. I slowed down, not sure what to do. Something about her gave me the creeps. Maybe it was the way she just stood there, not moving, not even acknowledging my truck barreling down the road. I've seen hitchhikers before, but this was different. Every instinct I had was telling me to keep going, not to stop. But then, as I passed her, I glanced in my side mirror, and she was gone. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing. I scanned the mirrors, expecting to see her walking away or disappearing into the trees, but there was nothing. Just fog and darkness. For a moment, I thought about getting out and checking, but something deep inside, told me that was a terrible idea. I shifted back into gear and kept driving, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I tried to shake it off, tell myself that it was just the fog messing with my mind, but that uneasy feeling stuck with me. I couldn't shake the image of her standing there, motionless, her face hidden in the shadows. About 20 minutes later, I started to relax a little. The road had straightened out, and the fog was thinning, giving me a bit more visibility. That's when the radio suddenly crackled to life, blasting a song at full volume. I jumped in my seat, my heart pounding again. I fumbled for the volume knob, turning it down, and that's when I heard it. Laughter. It wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from the back of the cab. I swear to God, I heard someone laughing, soft, almost childlike. My blood ran cold. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone sitting in the sleeper behind me, but there was nothing. The laughter stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart racing, and turned around to check the cab. I grabbed the flashlight I keep in the glove box and shined it into the sleeper area. It was empty, just like I knew it would be. But that didn't make me feel any better. I sat there for a minute, trying to calm down, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something about that road, that night, was off. I got back on the road, driving a little faster now, just wanting to get off Route 17 as soon as possible. The fog was starting to lift, and I could see the stars overhead. I thought maybe the worst was over. That's when I saw her again. The same woman, standing in the middle of the road this time. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding on the wet pavement. My headlights illuminated her for just a second before she disappeared again, swallowed up by the fog. I stared out into the darkness, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I didn't get out. I didn't even consider it this time. I just sat there, staring at the spot where she had been. My mind was racing. There was no way she could have been real. There was no way she could have gotten there. Not after I'd driven miles since I first saw her. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, I forced myself to start driving again. I didn't see her again after that, but I felt her. I know it sounds crazy, but I could feel her presence, like she was still there, just outside my line of sight, watching me. When I finally made it off Route 17 and back onto the main highway, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. The fog was gone, the stars were bright in the sky, and I could see the lights of a small truck stop up ahead. I pulled in, parked the truck, and just sat there for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. I don't believe in ghosts. At least, I didn't before that night. But something happened out there on Route 17, something I can't explain. Maybe it was just the fog and the isolation playing tricks on my mind, but it felt real, too real. I still drive that route occasionally, but I avoid Route 17 whenever I can, and when I can't, I make sure I'm off it long before the sun goes down. I've heard stories from other truckers, stories about that same stretch of highway, about people seeing strange figures in the fog, or hearing things in their cabs when they're alone. Most of them laugh it off, say it's just nerves or exhaustion. But I know better. There's something out there on Route 17, something that doesn't belong in this world. And if you're ever driving through the Appalachian Mountains late at night, keep your eyes on the road and don't stop for anything. You never know who or what you might see. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. I've told a few people, close friends mostly, but I don't like to talk about it much. People tend to look at you funny when you say you've seen a ghost, or whatever it was I saw. But every time I pass that exit for Route 17, I get a chill down my spine. And every once in a while, when I'm driving through the mountains late at night, I think I hear it again. That soft, childlike laughter coming from the back of the cab. I never check anymore. I just keep driving, and I don't look back. I'm no stranger to the open road. As a long-haul trucker, you see everything. Dust storms, blizzards, accidents you wish you could forget, and stretches of road so long they feel like they'll never end. But one night, in the middle of a route that should have been routine, I saw something that still haunts me to this day. This story isn't the kind of tale you tell around the campfire to scare your friends. No, this is the kind of story that lingers in the back of your mind whenever you're alone on the highway, with nothing but the hum of the engine and your thoughts to keep you company. It happened about 6 years ago, back in 2018. I was on a job hauling freight from Los Angeles to Flagstaff, Arizona. I'd taken that route dozens of times, but that night felt different. I was hauling a full load of industrial equipment, and I needed to make it to Flagstaff by morning. It was October, and while the desert was still warm during the day, the nights were starting to get cold. That particular night, the sky was clear, with a full moon lighting up the road. Highway 62 The road that stretches from the outskirts of Joshua Tree all the way through the Mojave Desert was empty. Not a single car in sight for miles. For those unfamiliar with Highway 62, it's one of those roads that seems to go on forever, cutting through vast stretches of desert with nothing around but rocks, sand, and the occasional cluster of scrubby trees. It's remote, isolated, perfect for truckers trying to make up time on their route. I've always enjoyed the solitude of those drives, the feeling of being alone in the vastness of the desert. But that night, something felt off. I had been driving for a couple of hours when I noticed something up ahead. It was a figure standing on the side of the road. At first, I thought it might be a hitchhiker. Strange, sure, but not unheard of, even on a road like this. People get stranded in the desert all the time, especially tourists who don't know what they're doing. As I got closer, I realized the figure wasn't moving, just standing there, perfectly still. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. Something was wrong. I slowed down to get a better look, but as I approached, the figure vanished. 1 second, it was there, and the next, it was gone. Just like that. I shook my head, trying to brush it off. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. It had been a long week after all, and I'd been pushing myself hard to make my deadlines. But the unease stayed with me. I kept driving, my hands tight on the wheel, my eyes scanning the horizon. A little while later, I spotted another figure, standing on the road ahead of me. This time, I slowed to a crawl. I could see the person more clearly now. A woman, standing on the side of the road, wearing what looked like a white dress. She was facing away from me, her long hair blowing in the slight desert breeze. It felt wrong. Everything about it felt wrong. I couldn't see her face, but something about the way she stood, the unnatural stillness of her posture, made my skin crawl. I slowed to a stop, my truck idling in the middle of the empty highway. I considered rolling down my window, asking if she needed help, but something stopped me. That same sense of dread I had felt earlier was now overwhelming. My gut was screaming at me to keep driving, to leave her behind. And then she turned around. Her face was pale, ghostly white, and her eyes, God, her eyes, were wide and empty, like dark pits where her pupils should have been. She stared at me, expressionless, for what felt like an eternity, though it could have only been a few seconds. I couldn't move. I was frozen, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My breath caught in my throat. I felt cold, colder than I'd ever felt in the desert night. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone, vanished. There was no trace of her, no sign that she had ever been there. The road was empty, as if I had imagined the whole thing. But I hadn't. I knew what I saw. I knew she was real, at least as real as something like that can be. I sat there for a minute, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Finally, I forced myself to keep driving. I turned the radio on, hoping the noise would drown out my thoughts, but all I got was static. I tried a few different stations, but it was the same on every frequency. Just static. That never happens out there. Even in the middle of nowhere, you can usually pick up something. The rest of the drive was tense. Every shadow seemed to move. Every flicker of light in the distance made me jump. I kept expecting to see her again, standing on the side of the road, waiting for me. But she never reappeared. I reached Flagstaff just before dawn, my nerves completely shot. I parked at the truck stop and just sat there for a while, trying to shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I didn't tell anyone about what I'd seen. Not then, at least. Truckers swap ghost stories all the time, but this felt different. It felt personal, like something had followed me out of the desert. A few days later, I was back on the road, driving through the same stretch of highway. I couldn't stop thinking about that night, about the woman I'd seen. So, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I stopped at a small diner just outside Joshua Tree and started asking around. Most of the locals didn't have much to say, but an older man sitting at the counter overheard me and offered to share a story. He told me about a legend, one that had been passed around by truckers and locals for decades. According to him, a young woman had died on Highway 62 back in the 1950s, killed in a car accident late at night. Her body wasn't found for days, not until a passing trucker spotted the wreckage off the side of the road. Since then, there have been reports of people seeing her, always at night, always on the side of the road, wearing the same white dress. They say she's looking for a ride, trying to make it home, but anyone who stops for her never makes it to their destination. Some say she's a lost soul, cursed to wander the highway forever. Others say she's something else entirely, something darker. I listened to his story, my stomach in knots, knowing full well that I had seen her with my own eyes. I didn't know what to believe. Was it a ghost? A hallucination? I still don't have an answer, and I'm not sure I ever will. That wasn't the last time I drove Highway 62, but every time I'm out there, I feel uneasy. The road feels different now, darker, as if something is watching, waiting. I still haul freight through the desert, but I don't stop at night anymore. I don't pull over for anything. I don't even look in my mirrors if I can help it. Because sometimes, late at night, when the moon is full and the road is quiet, I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A figure, standing on the side of the highway, watching as I drive by. And every time, I feel that same cold dread creeping up my spine, just like it did that first night. I don't talk about it much. People think you're crazy if you start telling stories about ghosts or phantoms on the highway. But I know what I saw. I know she's out there, waiting for her next ride. And if you ever find yourself driving down Highway 62 late at night, and you see a woman standing on the side of the road, don't stop. Don't slow down. Just keep driving. Because once you see her, she never really leaves you. I still think about that night sometimes, especially when I'm alone on the road, with nothing but the stars and the empty highway stretching out in front of me. I wonder what would have happened if I had stopped, if I had gotten out of my truck and walked toward her. Would I have been one of those people who never made it to their destination? Or was it something else, something darker, waiting for me in the shadows? I guess I'll never know. But one thing's for sure. There are things out there on the road that we can't explain. Things that defy reason and logic. And once you encounter them, they stay with you, like a shadow you can't shake. So, if you're ever driving alone at night and you see something that doesn't feel right, trust your instincts. And for God's sake, don't stop. It's funny how the road can swallow you whole, chew you up, and spit you back out without so much as a whisper. It becomes part of you, like the air you breathe, or the beat of your heart. After 20 years of driving trucks coast to coast, you get used to it. But every now and then, the road reminds you just how dangerous it can be, how it holds secrets that no amount of time behind the wheel can prepare you for. This story isn't one I tell very often. It's not the kind of thing that makes for good conversation at a truck stop over a cup of coffee. Some folks wouldn't believe it anyway, and honestly, I don't blame them. I still have a hard time believing it myself. But it happened, and it's been sitting in the back of my mind like a bad dream ever since. I was driving a route through the Midwest, a quiet stretch of highway, cutting through endless fields of corn and wheat. It was late fall, and the air had that cold bite to it, the kind that creeps in through the cracks of the cab, even when the heater's running full blast. I was hauling a load of timber from a mill in Minnesota, headed down to Kansas City. It wasn't the longest route I'd ever driven, but it was one of those nights when everything felt off, like the world was tilted just a little to the left. I had gotten a late start that day. The sun was already dipping below the horizon by the time I hit the road, and before long, I found myself driving through pitch-black darkness. The thing about those Midwestern highways is that they don't give you much to look at, just long, straight stretches of road with nothing but the occasional distant farmhouse or an old windmill silhouetted against the sky. The only light came from my headlights, cutting through the black, and the soft hum of my tires on the asphalt was the only sound to keep me company. It was well after midnight when I decided I needed to take a break. My eyes were getting heavy, and the drowsiness was starting to creep in. I saw a sign for a rest stop coming up, one of those small, out-of-the-way places that barely qualify as a rest area. It wasn't much, just a couple of picnic tables, a vending machine, and a dingy bathroom that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 80s. But it was enough. I figured I could pull over, stretch my legs, maybe grab a snack, and keep going. I pulled into the lot and parked the rig. There were only 2 other vehicles there, an old RV that had seen better days, and a beat-up sedan with out-of-state plates. The place was eerily quiet, more so than I expected. No sounds of other truckers chatting or the hum of a nearby highway, just silence. I got out of the cab and stretched, the cold air stinging my skin. It was dead still, not even a breeze. That kind of silence, the kind that feels too heavy, always puts me on edge. There was something wrong about it, but I shrugged it off, chalking it up to being tired. I headed toward the bathroom, figuring I'd take care of business before grabbing something from the vending machine. As I walked, I noticed the RV again. It was parked just a few spaces away from my truck, close enough that I could make out some details in the dim light from the single bulb flickering above the rest stop. It looked old, real old, like something out of a different era. The paint was peeling, the windows were grimy, and the tires looked like they hadn't been moved in a long time. I didn't see anyone inside, but the curtains were drawn, giving it an unsettling, abandoned feel. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just a regular old RV, probably someone taking a break on a long road trip. But as I reached the bathroom door, I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the gravel behind me. I turned around quickly, expecting to see someone walking toward the building, maybe another trucker or someone from the sedan. But there was no one. The parking lot was empty except for my truck, the RV, and the sedan, which hadn't moved an inch. The air was still, and the only sound was my own breathing. I stood there for a moment, scanning the lot, but there was nothing. No movement, no people. Just the feeling that something, or someone, was watching me. I shook my head, annoyed at myself for getting spooked over nothing, and pushed the bathroom door open. The inside was just as bad as I'd imagined. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow over the cracked tiles and the graffiti-covered walls. I quickly did what I came to do, then washed my hands in a sink that barely worked. The whole place smelled of mildew and old urine, and I couldn't wait to get out of there. As I was about to leave, I heard something, a faint sound, like whispering. It was so soft that at first I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind. The whispers seemed to be coming from outside, near the RV. I stopped, listening closely. It was hard to make out, but it was definitely voices. 2, maybe 3 people, speaking in low tones. My first thought was that someone was playing a prank on me, maybe some kids messing around. But there was something about those voices, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. They weren't speaking English, at least not any English I'd ever heard. It was more like murmuring, a language that didn't sound quite right. Too soft, too fast, like they were speaking just below the edge of hearing. I opened the door and stepped outside, scanning the lot again. The voices stopped the second I stepped out. The RV was still there, dark and silent, and the sedan hadn't moved. There was no sign of anyone. I started walking back to my truck, moving faster now. The air felt heavier, colder. My breath came out in little puffs of steam, and I could feel my pulse quickening. Something wasn't right, and every instinct I had was telling me to get the hell out of there. That's when I saw it. Movement, just out of the corner of my eye, near the RV. I turned my head quickly, and there, standing in front of the RV, was a man. At least, I think it was a man. He was tall, too tall, his frame gaunt, almost skeletal, dressed in what looked like a dark suit that hung loosely from his body. His face was pale, unnaturally pale, like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. But it was his eyes that froze me in place. They were too large, bulging out slightly, with dark circles around them, like he hadn't slept in weeks. He was staring right at me, unblinking. I stood there, frozen. He didn't move, didn't say anything, just stared. My mouth went dry, and every muscle in my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't take my eyes off him. Then, slowly, he lifted one bony hand and waved. But it wasn't a normal wave. It was stiff, mechanical, like he was mimicking the gesture, but didn't quite understand it. That broke the spell. I turned and bolted for my truck, not caring if I looked like a coward. My boots crunched on the gravel as I sprinted across the lot, the cold air biting at my face. I reached the cab, yanked the door open, and jumped inside, slamming it shut behind me. My hands were shaking as I jammed the key into the ignition, and the engine roared to life. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man standing there. But the lot was empty again. The RV, the sedan, everything was still. But I didn't stick around to find out if he was coming back. I threw the truck into gear and tore out of the rest stop, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The road stretched out ahead of me, empty and dark, but I didn't care. I just needed to get as far away from that place as possible. For the next hour, I drove in silence, my hands gripping the wheel so tight, my knuckles turned white. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see that man, or whatever he was, following me. But there was nothing, just the empty road and the hum of the engine. I didn't stop again until I reached Kansas City. By then, the sun was coming up, and the events of the night felt like a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I don't drive that route anymore. I avoid it like the plague, and I haven't been back to that rest stop since. I asked around a little, talked to some other truckers, but no one seemed to know much about it. A few guys told me they'd heard strange things about that stretch of highway, but nothing concrete, just rumors and whispers. I don't know what I saw that night, and maybe I never will. But there's one thing I do know. The road isn't always as empty as it seems. There are things out there, things that don't belong, things that wait in the dark, watching. And if you're ever driving through the Midwest late at night and you find yourself at a lonely rest stop, keep your eyes open, because you never know what might be watching you from the shadows. There's something about the open road that calls to some of us. The solitude, the quiet hum of the tires on the asphalt, the endless horizon stretching out ahead. Most people hate it. Too empty, too lonely. But me, I used to love it. The road was my home. I spent more time in my rig than I did in my own bed, hauling loads across the country, passing through countless towns and cities, most of which I've long forgotten. But there's one night, one stretch of highway, that I'll never forget. No matter how hard I try, it haunts me to this day. This is my story, and it's as real as the diesel fumes in my lungs. It was late 2016. I'd been on the road for close to 15 years at that point, and I had a routine down. I knew my limits, how far I could push myself before needing to stop, how many hours of sleep I could survive on. I also knew which highways I liked, the ones that made for an easy drive, and the ones that had a bad reputation. Route 93, cutting through Nevada, was one of those roads. It's isolated, winding through desolate stretches of desert, with nothing but scrubland, mountains, and the occasional ghost town to break the monotony. It's one of those places that feels forgotten by time, and if you ever break down, good luck finding help. I was hauling a load of electronics from Salt Lake City down to Las Vegas. It was supposed to be an easy run, one I'd done a dozen times before. But as I left the Utah border and crossed into Nevada, something felt off. The sky was overcast, unusual for the desert, and the wind had picked up, howling through the sagebrush like something alive. I tried to brush it off as nothing more than the desert playing tricks on me. But deep down, I had a gut feeling that tonight wasn't going to be like the other trips. I've always trusted my gut. In this line of work, you have to. There's something about being alone on the road for so long that sharpens your instincts, makes you more in tune with your surroundings. So when that sense of unease crept in, I should have listened. But I didn't. I told myself I was being paranoid and kept driving. By the time I hit the stretch of Route 93 south of Ely, the sun had long since set, and the desert was cloaked in darkness. There wasn't another soul on the road. No headlights in my rearview mirror. No signs of life anywhere. Just me, my truck, and the road. I figured I'd push on for a few more hours, make it to the next rest stop, and catch a few hours of sleep before finishing the run in the morning. That's when the lights appeared. At first, I thought it was another truck coming up behind me. I glanced in the mirror, expecting to see headlights cresting over the hill in the distance. But there was nothing. The lights weren't coming from behind me. They were ahead. Two faint orbs of light, glowing just off the side of the highway, maybe a mile ahead. They weren't streetlights or a town. I knew this stretch of road too well, and there wasn't anything out there but desert and rock. I slowed down, trying to get a better look. The lights flickered, like old lanterns swaying in the wind. My heart started to race, though I couldn't explain why. It was just a couple of lights, probably some locals camping out or something, but there was something about them that didn't sit right with me. As I got closer, the lights grew brighter, but they didn't move. No shadows, no flicker from a campfire. Just two steady glowing orbs hovering at the edge of the road. I was maybe a quarter mile away when the engine started to sputter. Now, I keep my rig in top shape. I'd just had it serviced a few days prior, and I'd filled up with diesel back in Ely, so there was no reason for the truck to be acting up. But the engine was coughing like it was about to die, and no matter how hard I pressed the gas, the truck wouldn't pick up speed. My heart was pounding now. I wasn't a superstitious guy, but every part of me was screaming that something was wrong, that I needed to turn around and get the hell out of there. But it was too late for that. The lights were right in front of me now, maybe 50 feet off the road, and I could see them clearly. They weren't headlights or lanterns or anything I'd ever seen before. They were just there, hanging in the air, glowing like some kind of unnatural fire. I brought the truck to a stop, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't have a choice. The engine had died completely, and I was sitting in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but those lights for company. That's when I heard it, a voice, faint, distant, carried on the wind. I couldn't make out the words, but it was unmistakable. Someone was calling out to me. I rolled down the window, listening, but the voice was gone. All I could hear was the wind rustling through the desert. I should have felt relief, but instead, the fear gnawed at me even more. I was a grown man, a trucker who had seen his fair share of weird stuff on the road, but this was different. This was wrong. I tried the ignition again, but the truck wouldn't start. Dead as a doornail. I reached for my phone, but of course, there was no signal. Not out here. There never was. I cursed under my breath, trying to figure out what the hell to do. I wasn't going to sit there all night, that's for sure. But I wasn't about to get out of the truck either. I knew better than that. Just as I was debating whether to wait for another car to pass or to try fixing the engine myself, the voice came again. Louder this time, closer. It wasn't coming from the road. It was coming from the desert, from the direction of the lights. I could hear it more clearly now, though I still couldn't understand what it was saying. It was muffled, garbled, like a radio that wasn't quite tuned in right. But one thing was clear. It was calling me. I leaned forward, staring out the windshield, and that's when I saw it. Something moved between the lights. A figure, just barely visible in the darkness. It was walking, no, limping, toward the road, toward me. My stomach twisted into knots. Every instinct I had screamed at me to roll up the window and lock the doors, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, staring at that figure as it made its slow, painful way toward my truck. It was close enough now that I could make out its shape. It was a man, or at least, it had been a man once. He was tall, with long, thin limbs and a gaunt face that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. His clothes were tattered, hanging off him like rags, and his skin was pale, almost translucent, in the glow of the lights. But it was his eyes that terrified me the most. They were hollow, empty, like dark pits in his skull. He stared at me with those eyes, unblinking, as he limped closer and closer. The voice came again, but this time, I realized it wasn't coming from him. It was coming from everywhere, all around me, echoing through the desert. Help me. The words sent a chill down my spine. It was a plea, desperate and pained, but there was something else underneath it. Something darker. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I finally snapped out of my trance and slammed my hand on the door lock. The sound of the locks clicking into place seemed to break whatever hold that thing had on me, and I scrambled to start the engine again. The truck roared to life on the first try, and without thinking, I floored it. The tires screeched as I peeled out of there, the trailer swaying behind me as I sped down the highway. I glanced in the rearview mirror once, just once, and I saw him. The figure, standing in the middle of the road, watching me as I drove away. The lights were still there, flickering in the distance, but he didn't follow. He just stood there, watching, until the darkness swallowed him up. I didn't stop again until I hit Vegas. I pulled into the first truck stop I could find, parked the rig, and sat there for a long time, just trying to calm down. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold on to the wheel. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at nothing, trying to convince myself that I hadn't seen what I thought I'd seen. But deep down, I knew. It was real, every bit of it. I didn't drive Route 93 for a long time after that. Hell, I avoided Nevada altogether if I could help it. But eventually, I had to go back. The job doesn't leave much room for fear or superstition. You do the run, you get paid, and you move on. But I never forgot that night. And sometimes, when I'm out on the road late at night, with nothing but the sound of the engine and the stars above, I can still hear that voice, faint and distant, carried on the wind. Help me. And I know, deep down, that one day I'll have to face whatever's out there again, because the road doesn't forget, and neither do I. There's something about driving a truck that gives you a unique perspective on the world. You're alone for hours, sometimes days, and you get used to the feeling of being isolated in a moving box of metal. The road becomes your world, your constant companion. I've been driving trucks for over 20 years, and in that time, I've seen things that would make most people question their sanity. But there's one experience that haunts me more than any other, a night that changed everything I thought I knew about the road. It happened in the fall of 2011. I was hauling a load of auto parts from Dallas to Denver, a route I'd driven dozens of times. The drive was a long one, about 13 hours, but nothing I couldn't handle. I left Dallas in the early afternoon, planning to drive straight through the night to make an early morning delivery. The weather was decent, cool for a fall night, with clear skies and little traffic. Perfect conditions for an all-nighter, or so I thought. I've always prided myself on being able to handle the isolation of long drives, but that night, something felt different from the start. There was a kind of heaviness in the air, an uneasiness that I couldn't shake. It wasn't the weather or the road. It was something deeper, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. But I brushed it off as nerves or fatigue and kept going. I was about 4 hours into the trip when I hit a long stretch of highway somewhere in northern Texas. The kind of stretch where there's nothing for miles, no gas stations, no lights, just the open road. I always liked those parts of the drive. They gave me time to think, to settle into the rhythm of the drive. But that night, the quiet felt oppressive. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional bump of the tires over the cracks in the road. It was just after midnight when I saw him. I was driving in the right lane, cruising at about 65 miles per hour, when I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was an animal, a deer or a coyote maybe, standing at the edge of the road. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't an animal at all. It was a man. He was standing on the shoulder, just outside the beam of my headlights, motionless, as if he was waiting for something. Now, seeing people on the side of the highway isn't uncommon, especially at night. Broken down cars, hitchhikers, you see it all. But there was something about this guy that didn't sit right with me. He was too still, too calm, just standing there like a statue in the middle of nowhere. I slowed down a bit as I passed him, just out of curiosity, and that's when I saw his face, It was pale, too pale, like he hadn't seen the sun in years. His eyes were wide and hollow, and his clothes were dirty, ragged like he'd been out there for a long time. He didn't move, didn't try to wave me down, didn't even flinch as my truck roared past him. He just stood there, staring. I kept driving, shaking my head, trying to push the image out of my mind. Maybe he was just some drifter, I told myself. Maybe he was on something. But still, something about him stuck with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. About 10 minutes later, I saw him again. Same guy, same spot, standing on the side of the road, motionless. But this time, I knew something was wrong. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me. I hadn't passed any cars, hadn't seen any turnoffs or exits. It was the same stretch of empty highway, and there he was, standing there like he'd been waiting for me. My heart started racing. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, pressing down on the accelerator, trying to put more distance between me and whatever that was. I glanced in my mirrors, but the road behind me was empty. Nothing but darkness. I drove for another 20 minutes, my nerves on edge, my eyes scanning the road for any sign of him. But there was nothing. No headlights in my mirrors, no sign of movement on the shoulder. Just the road stretching out into the darkness. I started to calm down, convincing myself that I'd imagined it. Maybe it was fatigue messing with my head, or maybe it was just some trick of the light. I'd been driving for hours after all, and sometimes the mind plays tricks on you when you're alone for that long. But then I saw him again. This time, he was in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt as the truck came to a jarring stop. He was standing right there, about 50 feet in front of me, in the center of the highway, staring at me with those wide, hollow eyes. I sat there, gripping the wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, as if daring me to run him over. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at him, but it felt like an eternity. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. Should I get out? Should I try to drive around him? Before I could decide, he disappeared. 1 second, he was standing there, and the next, he was gone. Just like that. No movement, no sound. He just vanished into thin air. I sat there in shock, my hands shaking as I stared at the empty road in front of me. I didn't know what I'd just seen, but I knew it wasn't normal. I was wide awake now, adrenaline pumping through my veins, and all I could think about was getting out of there. I hit the gas and sped down the highway, my eyes glued to the road, half expecting him to appear again at any moment. But he didn't. The road stayed empty, and after a while, I started to relax. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, I thought. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. But then I felt it. A cold breeze blowing through the cab of the truck. It was subtle at first, just a slight chill that made me shiver. But it grew stronger, colder, until it felt like I was driving through a snowstorm. I glanced at the dashboard, but the heater was on full blast. There was no reason for it to be this cold. I looked in the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw him again. He was in the back of the cab, sitting in the sleeper area, staring at me through the mirror. I froze, my blood turning to ice. He was just sitting there, calm and still, like he belonged there. His eyes locked onto mine through the mirror, and I could feel the weight of his stare pressing down on me, suffocating me. I didn't know what to do. My mind was screaming at me to pull over, to jump out of the truck, to do something. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped in my own body, as he sat there, watching me. I don't know how long I drove like that, but it felt like hours. The cold continued to creep through the cab, seeping into my bones, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. And all the while, he just sat there, silently staring at me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. His voice was barely a whisper, but it echoed through the cab, filling the space around me. "Help me." Those two words sent a shiver down my spine, and suddenly, I could move again. Without thinking, I slammed on the brakes and swerved onto the shoulder, the truck skidding to a stop on the gravel. I jumped out of the cab, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. The cold vanished as soon as I stepped outside. The night was still, the air warm against my skin, and the road was silent. I stood there for a long time, my hands trembling, staring at the truck. I half expected him to be standing there, waiting for me. But the cab was empty. The sleeper area was dark, and there was no sign of him. I didn't get back in the truck right away. I couldn't. I was too shaken, too scared to even think about driving. I sat on the side of the road for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't explain it. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't my imagination. I knew that much. It was real. He was real. Eventually, the sun started to rise, and I knew I had to keep moving. I couldn't stay on the side of the road forever. So I got back in the truck, my hands still shaking, and started driving again. The rest of the trip passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I glanced in the mirror, I half expected to see him sitting there, staring at me. When I finally reached Denver, I parked the truck and got out as fast as I could. I didn't want to be in that cab any longer than necessary. I made my delivery and called it a day, finding a cheap motel where I could get some sleep. But even in the safety of the motel room, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still with me, watching me from the shadows. That was the last time I drove that route. I don't know who or what that man was, but I never want to see him again. I've heard stories from other truckers about strange things on the road, but I always thought they were just that, stories. Now, I'm not so sure. The road has a way of playing tricks on you, of showing you things you'd rather not see. And sometimes, those things follow you, haunting you long after you've left them behind. To this day, I still think about that night. Every time I get behind the wheel, I wonder if I'll see him again. I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for someone to help him. And I wonder what would have happened if I had stopped to help. My name is Jake, and I've been a long-haul truck driver for over a decade. In those years, I've crisscrossed this great country more times than I can count, traveling through everything from bustling cities to the quietest back roads. You see a lot on the road, but what I experienced one night is something that still haunts me. It's a tale of darkness, desperation, and a fear that lingers long after the engines have gone silent. It all began on a chilly October night in 2018. I was hauling a load of produce from California to New York, a route I had driven many times before. I left the distribution center in the late afternoon, aiming to make it to my next stop by dawn. The first part of the drive went smoothly. The sun set behind the mountains, casting a beautiful orange hue across the sky, and as darkness enveloped the road, I tuned in to the local radio station, letting the voices fill the cab and keep me alert. As I traveled through the remote stretches of Nevada, the landscape began to change. The rolling hills gave way to vast, open plains, and the occasional ranch or lonely gas station became few and far between. I remember glancing at the clock. It was just past midnight. The quiet of the night was almost oppressive, and I could feel the fatigue beginning to creep in. That's when I spotted the flickering lights in the distance. At first, I thought it was a mirage, a trick of the mind from driving too long in the dark. But as I drew closer, I realized it was a small diner, an old roadside establishment that looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. The neon sign above the door buzzed sporadically, casting an eerie glow against the barren landscape. I knew I shouldn't stop. I was running behind schedule, and the company always stressed the importance of making time. But something compelled me to pull in. I parked the rig and stepped out, the cold air hitting me like a slap to the face. The diner looked abandoned, but the lights inside were on, and I could hear the faint sound of a jukebox playing an old Elvis song. Hesitantly, I pushed the door open, and the little bell above it jingled as I stepped inside. The place was as run down as I'd expected. The vinyl booths were torn, the linoleum floor was cracked, and the air smelled stale, like it hadn't been aired out in ages. There was no one at the counter, and I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" My voice echoed in the silence, but there was no reply. I walked further into the diner, glancing around to see if anyone was in the back. That's when I noticed her. A waitress stood behind the counter, wiping down the surface with a rag. She looked up as I approached, her face pale and tired, but she managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome. What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I ordered a coffee and a slice of pie, feeling a bit awkward in the empty diner. The waitress moved with a mechanical efficiency as she prepared my order, and I couldn't help but notice how her hands trembled slightly. I tried to make small talk, asking her how business was, but she only shrugged and replied, "It's been slow lately. Not many travelers come through here anymore." I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine as I took a seat at the counter. The jukebox continued to play its melancholic tunes, and I took a sip of the coffee she poured for me. It was bitter, but I welcomed the warmth. As I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The diner felt like a time capsule, frozen in a moment long gone. I glanced around, and that's when I noticed a large, faded photograph hanging on the wall behind the counter. It was a black and white picture of the diner from decades ago, with a group of smiling patrons gathered around a table. The woman in the photo looked remarkably like the waitress, but younger, full of life. "Is that you in the picture?" I asked, nodding towards the wall. She looked up, her expression darkening. "That was a long time ago," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Things were different then." I shifted in my seat, feeling the weight of her words. There was a strange energy in the air, a sense of desperation that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Suddenly, the lights flickered overhead, and I glanced outside through the grimy windows. I noticed a dark figure standing by my truck, but as I squinted to see better, the figure vanished. "Did you see that?" I asked the waitress, my heart racing. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear. "What did you see?" she asked, her voice trembling. "A person by my truck. They just disappeared," I replied, feeling the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You should leave. This place isn't safe. Not anymore." Her warning sent a wave of panic through me. "What do you mean?" Before she could respond, the front door swung open with a loud bang, and a gust of cold wind rushed into the diner. A man entered, wearing a dirty coat and a weathered hat that obscured his face. He stepped inside, and the atmosphere shifted. The warmth of the diner felt like it was being sucked away, replaced by an overwhelming chill. The waitress's face went pale as she stepped back behind the counter. "Not him. Please, not him," she whispered. The man approached the counter, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked around, his gaze lingering on me before finally settling on the waitress. "Still working here, I see," he said, his voice gravelly and harsh. The waitress didn't respond. She merely stared at him, her eyes filled with fear. "Can I get a cup of coffee?" he asked, his tone menacing. Sure. I'll get it for you," I said, my heart racing. I didn't want to provoke him, but I also didn't want to leave the waitress alone with him. The man turned to me, a grin spreading across his face that sent chills down my spine. "You should mind your business, trucker. This isn't your place." Before I could respond, the waitress moved quickly to pour the coffee, her hands shaking. I noticed her eyes darting towards the door, as if she were looking for an escape. The man took a seat at one of the booths, and I felt the tension in the air thickening. "You know, I used to come here all the time," he said, glancing around the diner. "Back when it was good, before it turned into this." "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "This place has a history, you know, a dark history." The waitress shot me a panicked look, and I could feel the fear radiating from her. "What are you talking about?" I pressed, feeling an involuntary shiver run down my spine. The man chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "You really want to know? It's not for the faint of heart." I could see the waitress's lips move silently, pleading with me to stay quiet. But curiosity got the better of me. "Tell me," I urged, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned back in his seat, taking a long sip of his coffee before continuing. "Years ago, this diner was the site of something terrible. A family was murdered right here, parents and their kids. They say their spirits still haunt this place." "Why would you say something like that?" the waitress interrupted, her voice shaking. "You know it's just a story." He smirked, a sinister glint in his eye. "Is it? Why do you think no one comes here anymore? This place is cursed. I can feel it." A heavy silence filled the diner, and I glanced around, feeling the weight of his words. The lights flickered again, and I could see the waitress trembling behind the counter. "Listen, I think I should be going," I said, trying to diffuse the situation. "I have a long drive ahead." But before I could get up, the man rose from his seat, blocking my path. "Not so fast, trucker. You've come all this way. Don't you want to hear the rest of the story?" My heart raced as I searched for a way out. The fear in the waitress's eyes told me all I needed to know. This man was trouble, and I had to get out before things escalated. "Listen, I really..." Suddenly, the diner plunged into darkness as the lights went out completely. Panic surged through me, and I heard the waitress gasp. "Oh no, not again," she exclaimed, her voice filled with dread. The man's laughter echoed in the darkness, deep and unsettling. "You're all trapped now. Welcome to my show." I felt my way to the door, but the man blocked my path again. "You think you can just leave? This is my place now. Get out of my way," I shouted, shoving past him. I could feel the cold air wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. As I burst through the door into the night, I didn't stop to look back. I ran to my truck, fumbling for my keys, as I heard the door of the diner swing open behind me. The cold night air hit me, and I felt a surge of adrenaline. I climbed into the cab, slamming the door shut and locking it. I glanced out the window and saw the man standing in the doorway, the flickering lights casting an eerie shadow across his face. He grinned, the look sending chills down my spine, and then he slowly faded back into the shadows of the diner. My heart pounded in my chest as I started the engine and hit the gas, tearing out of the parking lot. I didn't stop until I was miles down the road, the diner disappearing in the rearview mirror. For the rest of the drive, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The waitress's terrified eyes haunted me, and the man's words echoed in my mind. I had always dismissed the stories of haunted places and restless spirits, but that night changed everything. I couldn't explain what had happened, but I knew one thing. Some places are better left untouched, and some stories are best forgotten. Months passed, and I never returned to that stretch of road. The image of the diner haunted my dreams, and I often wondered about the waitress and that dark figure. Were they trapped in that diner, reliving the horrors of the past? I didn't know, and part of me was terrified to find out. The road continued to call to me, but I drove different routes, avoiding the ghosts of that night. I met other truckers along the way, and when they shared their own stories, I listened, but never shared mine. Some things are too chilling to speak aloud. I'd learned my lesson well. Sometimes, it's safer to let the darkness stay buried. And every now and then, when the night grows still and the road stretches endlessly before me, I can almost hear the distant echoes of that diner, the laughter of lost souls trapped in time, and the haunting call of a road less traveled. I've been a long-haul trucker for over a decade, navigating the back roads and highways of this vast country. I've experienced my fair share of eerie moments and strange encounters, but nothing compares to the night I found myself driving through the desolate stretches of West Texas. This is a story I haven't told many people, but it's a memory that lingers, a chilling reminder of what can happen when you least expect it. It was late October, and I was on a solo run, hauling a load of agricultural equipment from California to a small town in Texas. The weather had been cooperative, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt the temperature drop sharply. The sky was painted in deep shades of purple and black, and the stars twinkled overhead like a distant audience watching my solitary journey. As I drove deeper into the Texas landscape, the road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly into darkness. Around 11 p.m., I found myself on a long, lonely stretch of highway, surrounded by nothing but miles of flat land. The only sounds were the steady hum of my truck's engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. I was a few hours away from my destination and pushing myself to make good time. I took a sip of my lukewarm coffee, trying to shake off the fatigue that was creeping in. That's when I saw it, a flickering light in the distance. At first, I thought it was a mirage, or maybe the reflection of my headlights on a distant sign. But as I approached, I realized it was a campfire, and nearby, I could make out the shapes of people gathered around it. I felt a strange pull to stop, even though my instincts told me to keep driving. I had always been a cautious driver, but something about that fire drew me in. I pulled over to the side of the road and stepped out of the truck, the cool night air hitting me like a wave. As I walked towards the flickering light, I noticed the silhouettes of a small group of people, 2 men and a woman. They looked like they were in their 20s, sitting on old wooden logs, their faces illuminated by the glow of the fire. "Hey there," one of the men called out, waving me over. "You look like you could use a break." I hesitated, glancing back at my truck. It wasn't common to encounter anyone out here, and the isolation made me uneasy. But I approached them, driven by a mixture of curiosity and the promise of companionship. "Name's Jake," I introduced myself as I settled on a log opposite them. "I'm just passing through." "Nice to meet you, Jake," the woman said, her voice warm. "I'm Emily, and these are my friends, Mark and Dave. We're just enjoying the night." I sat there for a while, engaging in small talk. They were friendly enough, and I found myself relaxing despite the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. As the conversation flowed, I learned they were on a camping trip, traveling around the state to explore different parks. They offered me some food from their supplies, hot dogs and marshmallows over the fire, and I accepted, grateful for the distraction. After a while, I noticed a tension in the air. The laughter seemed forced, and their eyes darted nervously to the surrounding darkness. I shrugged it off at first, thinking it was just my imagination. But when the laughter died down, an uneasy silence settled around us. It was as if the night itself had drawn closer, wrapping us in a shroud of darkness. "Do you ever get the feeling you're being watched?" Mark asked suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost conspiratorial. I chuckled nervously. I guess we all feel that way sometimes, especially out here in the middle of nowhere. Emily nodded, her expression serious. "There's a story about this place. They say it's haunted." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Haunted? By what?" "There's a legend about a truck driver who disappeared around here years ago," Dave chimed in. "They say he was traveling late at night and never made it to his destination. Some folks claim they can still hear him calling for help in the wind." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to laugh it off. "Sounds like an urban legend." "Maybe," Mark replied, glancing over his shoulder. "But I've heard strange noises out here. Sometimes it feels like something is watching you, lurking just out of sight." I laughed nervously again, but my heart wasn't in it. I glanced at my watch. I needed to get back on the road. "I appreciate the company, but I should get going. I have a delivery to make in the morning." The group exchanged uneasy glances, and I sensed a shift in their demeanor. "You're leaving?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with concern. "Yeah, I've got to." I stood up, brushing off my jeans. "Thanks for the food, though. It was great." "Be careful out there," Dave said, his voice serious. "It's not safe driving at night, especially on this road." I nodded, feeling the weight of their words. "I'll be fine. Thanks again." As I walked back to my truck, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The air felt heavier, and the shadows around me seemed to stretch and dance in the flickering light of their campfire. I climbed into the cab and started the engine, trying to push the unease away. The highway was desolate, and the night swallowed me whole. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the fire flickering behind me. But the darkness remained unbroken. The further I drove, the more I felt an inexplicable sense of dread settle in my stomach. Hours passed, and the fatigue began to creep back in. I turned up the radio, hoping to drown out the silence, but it only added to my unease. The landscape around me was barren, with only the occasional sign to remind me I was still on the right path. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, like someone whispering. I glanced around, heart racing, but there was nothing but the highway stretching ahead. I shook my head, convincing myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again, more distinctly this time. It was a soft voice, calling out from the darkness. "Help. Me." My blood ran cold, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. It was the same voice I had heard about in the campfire story. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to focus on the road, but the whispers continued, echoing in the corners of my mind. "Help. Me." I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, lurking just beyond the reach of my headlights. I pressed down on the accelerator, the truck roaring to life as I pushed it faster. The road blurred past me, and I tried to drown out the whispers with the sound of the engine. Suddenly, the headlights caught a glimpse of something on the side of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as I skidded to a stop. My heart pounded in my chest as I squinted into the darkness, trying to make sense of what I had seen. There, just off the road, stood a figure. It was a man, gaunt and pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. He raised a hand, as if reaching out for help. My instincts screamed at me to drive away, but I felt an overwhelming urge to help him. I rolled down my window, my voice trembling. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The man didn't respond. He simply continued to stand there, his expression vacant. The whispers grew louder in my ears, drowning out my thoughts. "Help. Me." Fear gripped me, but I fought against it. "Get in. I'll take you somewhere safe," I yelled, my heart racing. Finally, he took a step closer, and in that moment, I saw his face clearly. It was sunken and hollow, a reflection of despair. My blood ran cold as I recognized him. It was the same man from the photograph in the diner, the ghostly figure from the campfire story. Without thinking, I threw the truck into gear and took off down the road, leaving the figure behind. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was gone, but the whispers remained, echoing in the confines of my mind. The rest of the drive was a blur. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that enveloped me, and the whispers continued to haunt my thoughts. When I finally reached the small town where I was delivering the load, I pulled into a truck stop to refuel and collect my thoughts. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm glow across the horizon, but I felt no relief. I stepped out of the truck and took a deep breath, trying to shake off the night's events. As I walked into the diner at the truck stop, I felt a strange sense of familiarity. The decor was similar to the diner where I had stopped before. Old photographs lining the walls, a jukebox in the corner. I took a seat at the counter, trying to gather myself. The waitress approached, and I recognized her immediately. It was Emily, the same waitress from the ghostly diner. My heart raced as I processed what I was seeing. "What are you doing here?" I blurted out. She looked at me with a puzzled expression, as if she had never seen me before. "I work here," she said simply, wiping down the counter. "Can I get you something?" I shook my head, trying to make sense of it all. You were camping. I saw you last night by the fire." Emily furrowed her brow. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've been working the night shift here for weeks." The unease washed over me like a cold wave. "But you were with two guys. You were telling stories about the road, the truck driver who disappeared." She shook her head again, confusion etched on her face. "I don't know what you're talking about, sir. I've been here all night." Panic gripped me. I felt as if I was losing my mind. I glanced around the diner, looking for familiar faces, but they were all strangers. It was as if I had stepped into another world, a parallel reality where nothing made sense. I quickly stood up, my heart racing. "I need to go," I mumbled, rushing towards the exit. I pushed the door open and stumbled outside, desperate to escape the unsettling atmosphere. The early morning sun bathed the parking lot in light, but it did little to quell the darkness that lingered in my mind. I climbed back into my truck, the familiar hum of the engine bringing me a moment of comfort. But as I drove away from the diner, the feeling of dread returned. The whispers echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of the night I couldn't escape. For days afterward, I found it hard to focus on the road. I replayed the events over and over, questioning my sanity. Had I really encountered that figure? Was it all a product of my imagination? Or had I brushed against something supernatural? Eventually, I forced myself to let it go, telling myself it was just a bad dream. I continued to drive, covering miles across the country, but the memory lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself again. Months later, I found myself back in Texas, delivering another load. I drove cautiously along the familiar stretch of highway, trying to avoid the places that brought back the nightmares. As I passed the spot where I had seen the campfire, a shiver ran down my spine. But then, I saw it. A flickering light in the distance. My heart raced as I felt the pull once again. It was as if the night was calling me back, urging me to return to that dark place. I fought against the urge to stop, but my curiosity won out. I pulled over and stepped out of the truck, the familiar cold air biting at my skin. As I approached the light, I felt the unease creeping back in. There were figures gathered around the fire, 2 men and a woman, just like before. "Hey there," one of the men called out, waving me over. "You look like you could use a break." I hesitated, staring into their faces, but the recognition was instant. They were the same people from that night: Jake, Emily, Mark, and Dave. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was caught in a loop, a never-ending cycle of fear and despair. I turned to run, panic taking hold of me. "Get away from me," I shouted, stumbling back towards my truck. But the whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts. "Help. Me." I climbed into the cab, slamming the door shut and locking it. The figures around the fire watched me with hollow eyes, their expressions frozen in time. I couldn't stay there any longer. I started the engine and tore away from the scene, driving faster than I ever had before. The highway blurred past me, and I didn't stop until I was far away from that cursed place. That night changed everything for me. I became a man haunted by shadows and whispers, forever chasing the darkness that lurked in the corners of my mind. I learned that some roads should never be traveled, and some stories should remain untold. To this day, I still drive the highways, but I avoid that stretch of Texas at all costs. I have shared my story with only a few trusted friends, always warning them to be careful when they find themselves alone on the road. The darkness is always waiting, ready to pull you in, and once you're in its grasp, it's nearly impossible to escape.